What am I supposed to start now?
Yeah.
Name, rank, and serial.
Name, rank, and serial number.
My name is Frank Wellington Hitchings the third. And that's all that's necessary.
Oh, birthday.
Oh, what was that?
When were you born?
I was born on July 24th, 1920. And I was in St. Louis, Missouri. My mother and father would leave there shortly afterwards because my father couldn't stand a lot of people. He wanted to get out where it was wide open spaces. Well, one thing that did occur there, in those days, mothers that had children were allowed to stay in the hospital for 6-7 days or so. And so my mother came home with me, and they lived in a sort of a duplex place, or rented this place. And the family downstairs had a little boy who heard all about this new child coming home and was extremely interested. So he asked my dad if he could come up and see the baby. He didn't know anything about babies. So Dad said, of course he could. And he trotted upstairs and into the kitchen where my mother was up and standing and working at the sink. This little boy walked in, took a look, and my mother happened to be pulling the feathers out of a little chicken. And this kid says, "Is that the baby?" So, well,
How old was he?
oh, he was 4 or 5, I guess. Old enough to know I was an unusual looking baby. Go. Well, my father, in those days, worked in the steel mills over in Granite City, Illinois. And not too long after I was born, they decided to move, my mother and dad decided to move out to the country, which is now Kirkwood, but in those days, I mean, it was in the brush. And Dad somehow or another managed to get his name on about 5 acres of property, a little old house that had been built sometime before. And we moved out to the country when I was 3 or 4, I guess. Certainly no more than that. And it was very, very rural. There were 2 ways to get into Kirkwood from where we lived. One of them is a roundabout way, which is now called Darty Ferry, which you'd be familiar with that if you know anything about the territory. The other way, in what is now Adams Avenue, was strictly a trail that forded the creek 7 times between our house and Geyer Road, what is now Geyer Road. And there was not much out there. And but Dad had always had a feeling about people crowding in around him, and he didn't like crowds. He wanted to get out where he felt free. That was the way he was. Maybe I inherited some of that too. My life was eventful but uneventful. In those early years, there wasn't much to do. It was very, very down-to-earth living. We had pets. One of my favorite pets, I always liked dogs, but one of my favorite pets was a goat. goat named Gertie, and a wonderful little pet. And by this time, Dad had a old Model T Ford, and Gertie could be out in the yard roaming around, and Dad could be coming home maybe a half a mile away, and all of a sudden Gertie her ears would stand up, and you could tell that she heard the Model T wherever it was. She would run and leap and jump up on the top of her little house and wait for Dad to come chugging in with his Model T. And one thing I remember about the Model T, going up the one route that ended up on Darty Ferry, you had to climb a steep hill. And when the gas was low in the gas tank, and that frequently occurred, you had to turn it around and back up the hill so that the gas would flow into the outlet there. That's the only way you could get up this one hill. So, well, then the next most important thing that remains in my mind is the Depression came. And I have to admit, we had to be a very, very fortunate family, because, well, actually, I was 8 or 9 years old when the Depression really became an item in our lives. But because of where we lived and how we lived, I must admit that I never suffered. And my family was much better off than most, because we had a little 5-acre piece of ground. Dad had a big garden all the time we were there. We had a cow, we had a milk goat, we had chickens, we had a couple of pigs, and there was always something to eat. A lot of chickens. I can remember almost every Sunday, Uncle Adolph and Aunt Lucille would bring the boys out, Andy, Tommy, and later on Pierre, and the family all had their Sunday meal together. And that was the highlight of our lives. Then when I got a little older, then we'd play corkball after we finished eating. But when so many people were out of work, my dad, somehow or another, found a job where he could continue to work, and that was the steel mills that were still operating somehow or another. The only thing was, to keep that job, Dad had to get up every morning about 3 o'clock, walk 1.5 miles to the end of the streetcar line, take an 1.5 hour trip down to the river in St. Louis, then get on a bus and go to Granite City, Illinois, to go to work at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, work 12 hours and come home when it was pitch dark. And for a long time, I never even saw him except on Sundays. And he worked like a dog, and my mother had to carry the load then for the rest of the stuff that he was not around to do. And as I got old enough to do anything, I had plenty of work to do myself, especially in that crummy garden. So, but that was the way we lived when, and as I said truthfully, I didn't even know there was a depression going on, because we didn't have much before, so we didn't miss very much then. And it was just we had a pretty nice life. And I went to grade school in Kirkwood, which required some transportation problems. But in any sort of a day that was, when this was possible, I had the one big toy I ever had in my life, and that was a second-hand bicycle, which I rode from out there clear into Kirkwood to the grade school, later on to a junior high school, and even into high school. And I made that trip every day the weather was not too bad. And that could have been one of the best things that ever happened to me too, because I was in great shape then. And I went to grade school, at which time I first met Stu O'Brien, who became one of my very closest friends over the years. And he and I were very, very close. We started going to school together when we were about the 4th grade, I guess. All the way through the 8th grade. Then we went into junior high school, which was a 2-year deal right next to the high school then, in a town on South Kirkwood Road. You've probably driven past it 1,000 times. And
I'm sorry, Dad, is that Knifer now?
that is Knifer.
Wait, what was the name of the grade school that you went to?
John Adams grade school. And we finished the 2 years in junior high and then entered high school, where I made one of the most memorable entrances ever known. I got off my bicycle, started up the long walk that goes up to the high school, and I looked at all these cool kids standing there, the cool boys, the good-looking girls, and I trotted up to the front door, looked around, tripped over the steps, and fell all the way down the stairs. And from then on, things got worse. So
The high school now that we know is Kirkwood High School.
Well, it's now Knifer Junior High School.
Okay, that was the
high school then. And only the 2 year prior to that was Knifer in those days. So I had a wonderful time all the time I went to school. I never could understand why guys complained about this or complained about that. I loved it. When went to high school, we had some of the finest teachers I've ever known in my life. They were really good, and when you went there, you learned something. You got a hold of John Williams' mother, Bloody Mary, who was the English teacher, and she was good, tough, very tough, especially on John. She wouldn't even have him in her class, incidentally. But she was tough on me, too, just because I knew him. So then the first year in high school was just sort of a breaking ground sort of a thing, and getting my feet on the ground, learning what it was all about. And, I wanted to do certain sports, but especially football. So when I was a freshman, I went out for the football team, and they told me to go away. They didn't have a uniform small enough to fit me, and didn't think that a 98-pound man was going to help the team. So I had to come back the next year, and the third year, before they finally listened to me. I did get to play C-team football, B-team football before then. Played a little baseball, ran a little track, which is difficult to do during the baseball season because they tied into each other. And I hated track. Hated it because what a dumb sport. You don't get to hit anybody. It's you just run, and it's tiring, and you get it. I never did like it, so. But my life there continued to be great. I couldn't have had more fun. I couldn't have known nicer people. But all good things end sometime.
Well, wait a minute, you did play, though, high school football, didn't you?
Sure.
Tell us
Sure.
about that. What position did you play?
Well, I was.
John Lovett and all those people come in to see you.
Well, John was ahead of me, of course, and he was a sort of an idol. He didn't come into me very much at all. He didn't know who I was then. John Levitt was a great football player, one of the best athletes I've ever known. Turned out to be, I guess, my very closest friend. But at that stage of the game, I didn't enter into John's life. But when he was graduating, this is very difficult for me. He did something that I'll always remember. He had a very expensive pair of kangaroo football shoes. And I had a cheap, we had to buy our own shoes in those days. They weren't supplied. I had a big, ugly, cheap pair of football shoes that it's a wonder anybody could have run in them. When John graduated from high school, he gave me his football shoes.
Man.
Well, that was big stuff.
Was he always from a wealthy family?
Yes.
Always, okay.
Yeah.
And why you? Why you?
I don't know. I don't really know. He
Well, you must have been friends or something.
well, we were teammates for a short time, but he was ahead of me. But he found that I guess I was a little bit like he was. He was tough, man. And he wouldn't quit. And he was great.
We loved him too,
Well, he was,
growing up.
everything about him was super. Ultimately, he had something to do with my getting into the leather business later on, of course. But anyway, John graduated. I was a halfback on the team as a junior, and in the senior, I was called signals and played safety and defense, and the running back on offense, and did the passing for the team. And we didn't have a great team. We had a couple of pretty good teams, but no championship teams. And we had a lot of fun. It was a great game.
What about Fitz? When did he come into this?
Fitz came in a year after I. And Fitz is well known for one thing. He was not a real good football player, although Fitz did everything hard. He was tough. We were playing a game against Crystal City, and it was a close ball game at the time. Fitz is sitting on the bench like he did frequently. It was cold, and those guys on the bench were wearing these great big things with the hood on and everything. And the guy from Wood River broke loose on one play and was headed up the sidelines for an obvious touchdown. As he passed the Kirkwood bench, Superman came out in this cape off the bench, wham! Knocked him about 20 yards. Just flattened this guy.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely flattened him. He didn't know what hit him. He was looking back and thinking what a great play as this was, and wham!
So I guess there was a flag on the play?
There was a flag. They awarded him a touchdown anyway.
Oh my gosh.
But But the football coach, Ernie Lyons, said, Fitzinger, you want to play that badly, get in there. Yeah.
So we got to play.
And one of my real close friends turned out to be a doctor later on, Julian Barnett. His father was a doctor, which my mother and father kept reminding me that at one time when I was 6 years old, Julian's father saved my life. Where your kids, I used to tell, was bitten by a shark over here. Mm-hmm. That was actually an appendectomy when my appendix burst. And old man Dr. Barnett evidently got out to our house, cold winter day, wrapped me in a blanket, put me in his car, drove me into Missouri Baptist Hospital and operated on me. And it was touch and go for a long time because I got double pneumonia along with it. Anyway, Julian Barnett, the boy, when I weighed 98 pounds, Julian weighed 210. And he was big. He could do everything, but he didn't like football. He played football because everyone expected it of him. They just thought he should. Anybody that size had to be a good football player, and he was.
He was big.
He was fast. He was everything. He's strong. He was everything, except he didn't have the heart for the game, which I don't criticize because he just didn't like it. So he made the team when he was a freshman. When he was a sophomore, he made all county. When he was a junior, he made all district. And I guess Julian said to himself, where else could I go? Hell with it. So he wasn't worth much as a senior because he just didn't care. He'd already done everything. Except we were playing Wellston. Wellston had never beaten Kirkwood in the history of the two schools. And at halftime we were losing 12-6 and getting our butts kicked. And it was the only time I ever heard or saw Coach Ernie Lyons get on somebody, and he really got on Julian. He called him everything. He finally got Julian so mad. We went out there the second half, and I never had more fun in my life. Just take the ball and trot behind Julian. And he was throwing guys right and left. They double teamed him. They didn't have two guys who could slow him down. They put three men on him, and he was just blasting them. If he could have played that kind of football all the time, we'd have never lost a game. It's too bad that he didn't. He went to St. Louis U from there. They had a coach by the name of Mueller Liley, who I heard talk one night. He said Julian Barnett was the best college football player, lineman, that he ever saw as far as technique was concerned. That he could do everything that he wanted to do. Only thing was, he really didn't want to do anything. But he was a great guy.
What did he end up doing?
Doctor. Yeah. Doctor. Yep. He was a good friend too. So, but all the through high school, and Stu and I were the closest of friends. We bummed together, we dated together, we just did everything together. And it stayed that way through our entire lives. Well, anyway, that was my high school career, pretty much.
You played one other sport in high school, didn't you? You boxed?
Well, that wasn't a high school sport.
An extracurricular.
1936. The Golden Gloves in St. Louis. You see, Dad used to be a boxer when he was young. And he was a pretty fair amateur boxer. And
What's your dad?
yeah. So two things that he did that had an effect on my life. One was that he bought a set of boxing gloves. The other was he built the apparatus for a punching bag, the light bag. It showed me how to punch the bag. You know, all this jazzy stuff and everything. Well, Dad taught me that stuff. And I used to enjoy that. I would do that by the hour. Just stand out there, and it was good for you, too. Well, I always wanted to find out what it was like. And in 1936, I was 16 years old, and it was time to find out if I was going to ever do it. So I started to look for a place where I could do some boxing, and I found a place in Maplewood called the Morty Wolf AC. And Morty Wolf was a boxing trainer over the years, and I ran into my next problem. How was I going to work this out? So it's one of the few times in my life I really conned my mother. Lied to her, if you wanted a better word for it, and convinced her that I was doing some heavy work in the library almost every night, and I had to go down. So I was going down on the doggone streetcar and working out down there, and came the tournament, and I did very well. There's two divisions. One, what's the word for those that have, the new guys?
Novices.
Novice. The novice division and the open division. To the novice division, you cannot have had, it had to be less than 5 regular matches, sponsored matches someplace or another. So I was a novice. And I remember there was another guy from Kirkwood who was, of course, bigger than I. Well, everybody was bigger than I. This guy was a well-known around school as a tough man. Tough guy. He played football, and he came from the wrong end of town. He was just one of those tough guys, but I liked him. He was a good guy. Name was Brady. Brady. Well, anyway, we went through this tournament, and I won 3 matches and was against this other guy for the championship. Well, I don't know where they got this other guy, but he was half bulldog and half elephant. I don't know, man, he was, man. Anyway.
They didn't do it by weight then?
Well, sure. But he was, somehow or another, he was twice as big and tough as I was. Anyway, he beat the living bejesus out of me. And no, it was different in those days. If you look today, amateur boxers wear the helmets. They're 2-minute rounds. And if you get hurt, the least bit, they call off the thing. That wasn't like that in those days. Man, oh man, oh man. And yet, as it turned out, it was one of the most memorable things that ever happened to me. This guy beat me from one end. He got in a lucky punch to begin with. And I swear, I didn't wake up until between the second and third rounds. I didn't even know there was a boxing match going on. But during that time, he never knocked me down. And in the third round, I actually began to do pretty well, only I was so tired. I was lucky to stand up, let alone do any damage to him. Anyway, the guy won a decision. And the crowd gave us a standing ovation. And I sat in the dressing room for about 45 minutes while Brady washed blood off of every part of my body. My eyes, my nose, my mouth, my ears were bleeding. And God, what a terrible shellacking I took. But I never...
Your mom spanked you? Okay, keep going.
Yeah, that was the next defeat. The next morning, a paper came out, the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, and they happened to catch me getting one right in the smisheroon. And my mother never looked at the sport page. How she ever did that, I'll never know. But there was her son, the librarian. Boy, was she mad at me. Boy, was she, but Dad wasn't. He was, when he came home that weekend, he was gone, always gone. By that time, he had a different job. He was traveling. And he thought it was great. So,
That's my boy.
yeah.
What did your mom do to you?
Well, we won't discuss that. She was, you might say, perturbed. So, anyway, that's another thing. Around that time, maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself. The Ballas Road, which is now anyone living in this area would know Ballas Road, was proposed and built, and it went right through the middle of our house. So in those days, they just went ahead, eminent domain and all that sort of stuff, and I don't know how much they gave my dad for the house, but he had to build another one. And I was then maybe, when that started, maybe 12, 13, and I got my first regular job. And years past, I had worked for some of the farmers around there when it came time for reaping and so forth. But the guy that ran the construction company building the road gave me a job handling the coal oil lanterns, which they had to put up every night in dangerous places. And so I must have had 20 lanterns or so that I had to refill every day and take out to their places every night, go get them in the morning. And that was my first really regularly paid job. And that was pretty good. What's that?
You were 12?
Somewhere around in there, somewhere. They built the road, went right through the middle of our house. Dad had to build another house, and he did it almost all by himself. When it came to things like the electricity, he went to a friend of his who was an electrician, came out, and they worked out some sort of a deal, things like that. But for the most part, he did it himself.
In the same general area?
Yeah, it was just moved, right on the same property. Well, it just moved 50 feet away from where the other one was, something like that. House is still out there on Ballas Road.
Is that down there by Sugar Creek?
Right, with Sugar Creek.
Country Club is sort of down at the bottom?
That's right.
Okay.
And so that's where I spent just about all of my life up to that point, and always loved it out there. It was a nice place to live. Well, anyway, that pretty well took us to...
Well, can I ask you a question? Why did you end up being an only child? Do you know that?
I had little to do with it.
Well, I know that, but did they just choose not to have any more? Not get pregnant?
That was an area where people were poor. You think of that area.
I have no idea.
I mean, she didn't have a miscarriage or anything else?
No, she had a serious illness, but it was later, when I was in college. So, but I have no idea. They didn't discuss those things with me. No.
So how'd you do in school? Where did you graduate in your graduating class?
Oh, come on. I graduated first in my graduating class. And do you know that I wasn't even the valedictorian?
Why is that?
Because Julian Barnett ranked about third in the class, and he was such an imposing character that they figured he stood up better than I, and I agreed with him. I agreed with him 100%. And didn't begrudge him that for a moment. So